And he was so funny. He was so funny. He would always have me laughing.
And the Night Stalker's reign of terror had only just begun. May 1985, and the Night Stalker had only just begun a series of crimes that would both sicken and terrify the residents of California. Preying on the unsuspecting citizens in their homes, he took glee in rape, murder, and mutilation. As the crimes escalated, detectives raced to try to identify who was responsible for the shockingly vicious attacks. Who was the Night Stalker? Richard Ramirez was born in 1960, the last of 5 children to Mexican immigrants, living in the Texan border town of El Paso.
El Paso was a town of about 500,000 people, and across the Rio Grande was Ciudad Juarez, which had 1.5 million people, about triple the size of El Paso. It's a heavily Hispanic population.
It was basically a very quiet town, a very quiet place to live.
Ramirez had a humble upbringing, typical to his neighborhood.
It was a low-income neighborhood, but it was nice. It had green grass in front, and the house was painted. It wasn't shabby, but it was quite small.
We were like lower-class people, and everybody used to just hang around together at night. We would all play games. All the neighborhood kids would get together up until everybody's parents started calling them in for dinner.
Richard's father was hard-working and strict with his children.
He was very much what I would classify as someone from Mexico who had come to El Paso and had scratched out a living here. He worked for the railroad. It's a hard scrabble when you're a first-generation immigrant to learn a new language and try to scrape a toehold in a new country.
The young Richard Ramirez appeared no different from his friends and neighbors.
They were all very nice. Normal neighborhood family, just like mine.
He was an ordinary kid, just like the rest of us. We went to school, minded our manners, did what we had to do, but no different than the rest of us.
He was friendly and he was nice and he was so funny. He was so funny. He would always have me laughing. We used to play this game called Kick the Can, and he was the fastest runner, so we always wanted to be on his team.
Richard's friend Patricia found him kind and caring.
If we wanted to take a shortcut to school, we had to cut through this really tough neighborhood. And he always used to wait for me, sitting on a little pony wall, and then he would walk me to school. It was always safer, to be in twos, I guess.
But by the time he turned 10, it appeared all was not well with Richard Ramirez.
He used to sit in back of me in 5th grade. And I remember that he would poke me in the back. And every time he would poke me, I would jump up. And so that time that he kept poking me, I turned around very upset and I said, hey, stop. And I remember him like slumping over and then just hitting the floor on the side.
He would have seizures. He would be shaking. We knew he was sick.
Ramirez was diagnosed with epilepsy, a condition that would affect him for much of his school life. As Ramirez approached his teens, he grew distant to his father and began to look up to his cousin Mike, a Vietnam veteran who boasted of many atrocities while in service.
The cousin kept multiple mementos of his time in Vietnam. And he pulled out this box and showed all of these photographs of the women he was raping or the heads he was cutting off. It was a fascination. It wasn't recoiling in horror. It was like, wow, look what you've done.
At the age when his sexuality was being formed, Ramirez was exposed to images of rape, torture, and murder.
These individuals are in their fantasy lives from early adolescence, and in some regards, some respects, their fantasy life is more real to them than reality. Their fantasy lives are filled with sadistic aggression, where there's a fusion of sex and aggression.
Ramirez later claimed that his cousin Mike gave him a front-row view of his brutality.
He watched this cousin shoot his wife.
After a petty argument at their apartment, Mike shot his wife in the face, killing her instantly.
And it stuck with him, not in the sense of it was a bad thing, not in the sense that how could you do something so horrendous? I mean, oh my God, being sick to your stomach. He was fascinated.
The fantasies of those that have committed serial crimes have been very carefully studied by the staff of the FBI Behavioral Science Unit over the years. The fantasies start very early in life and oftentimes are a result of some incident that triggers these thoughts. And once the fantasies become sexualized, it becomes extremely dangerous because they start fantasizing about events of rape, torture, mutilation.
I did not notice anything strange of him until we were in high school. And he was no longer part of my clique kind of thing. That's when I noticed that he was different and he had changed. Didn't no longer say hello, that kind of thing. I noticed that he would hang out with boys that did drugs.
A lot of second-generation immigrants sometimes get involved in gangs, and some of the thinking is that they see that their parents who've come to America and have worked really, really hard and have very little to show for it, and some people think that there's a disillusioning on their part, like why play by the rules if this is what you end up with, which is what my parents had. And I suppose you could say that might have been a factor in the rebelliousness of Ricky Ramirez.
Ramirez became interested in hard rock and Satanism.
A lot of kids, high school kids for instance, were dabbling in this, and they would give it their own little touches. And being high school kids, the brain's still developing, they're developing. A lot of them got in trouble and went the wrong way. We did have some kids that killed their parents and things like that.
Ramirez dropped out of school and began living on the fringes of society, sometimes sleeping in the local cemetery.
Right from the get-go, Richard stole anything that was loose and anything that he could pry loose. I mean, his neighbors started calling him Didos Fingers, and they call him Ricky Rabone, Ricky the Thief.
After the attempted rape of a guest in an El Paso hotel, Ramirez moved to California.
He became a cocaine and alcohol addict. He lived in what's called Skid Row in Los Angeles, which is a pretty scruffy area. I mean, there are people doing everything and taking everything, and homelessness is not an unusual thing. You live in what's called a flop house, where you go and flop to get off your high or to recover. Now, did the drugs affect his brain functioning? Did it affect the way he saw the world? Probably, but it wasn't causative. It didn't lead to make him kill. He was already primed.
Ramirez lived day to day, taking drugs, using prostitutes, stealing cars, breaking and entering.
So he would go out in the suburbs where often they did not lock their doors at night even. They didn't lock their windows. This was like heaven for him. This is exactly what he was looking for. And he would go through the unlocked doors and unlocked windows. Sometimes he would go in and burglarize when nobody was home at night. And then he got bolder and bolder and bolder.
The vast majority of burglaries are for material gain. These are usually drug people who want to get some money to buy drugs, and they might do it with a friend or a partner, and so on.